Late evening, August 14th, 1945. Beneath the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, there is a bunker. Small, windowless. The air is thick with August heat. NHK technicians sit at their equipment, checking levels, not looking at each other. At the center of the room, before a pair of microphones, a man in formal court dress takes his seat. The needle drops. The man begins to speak. The technicians exchange a glance. Something is wrong. His voice is so soft the recorder can barely capture it. They signal. He offers to record again. On the second take, his voice is considered too high-pitched, with occasional characters skipped, but it will have to do. The second recording is declared the official one. 4 minutes and 45 seconds. That is how long the most important voice in Japan speaks into that microphone. The technicians transfer the recording onto 2 vinyl records, pressed on the spot. The records go into a safe beneath the palace, the most important object in Japan, sealed underground. Now cut forward, 3 hours. Same palace. No lights. The city is under blackout, electricity cut, nothing moving in the dark except flashlight beams and the sound of boots on stone. Armed soldiers in Imperial Army uniforms move fast through underground corridors, pressing bayonets against the chests of startled staff, demanding to know where the records are. They have been searching for hours. By the time those soldiers sealed the palace gates, those records were already outside them. The men with the flashlights do not know this yet. They will keep searching until dawn. To understand what drove men to raise guns inside an imperial palace, you have to understand what Japan had become by August 1945. 50,000 aircraft, gone. 3,000 tanks. More than 300 warships. 19 aircraft carriers, 8 battleships. Sunk or burned or rusting in harbors, Japan no longer controlled. At least 2 million Japanese troops dead across the Pacific. Strategic bombing had reduced most major cities to ash. Hiroshima, August 6th. Nagasaki, August 9th. The Soviet Union had poured its armies into Manchuria on that same day, the last strategic direction from which Japan had hoped for anything. With Okinawa and Iwo Jima in American hands, Allied forces were assembling for a final assault on the home islands. By any rational measure, the war was over. But the war did not feel over to every Japanese officer. It could not. For centuries, no foreign power had conquered Japan. That record had become more than history. It had become identity, ideology, the very definition of what Japan was. To surrender was not simply to lose a war. It was to break something that had never been broken. The Supreme War Council, the so-called Big Six, had spent days in deadlock. 3 could read the military reality clearly enough. 3 others believed one more massive battle on Japanese soil might extract terms from the Allies worth dying for. Their initial response to the Potsdam Declaration, issued in late July, demanding unconditional surrender, warning of prompt and utter destruction, had been mokusatsu, a word meaning, depending on inflection, either no comment or contemptuous silence. The Allies took it as rejection. The bombs followed, and still the 6 men could not agree. In the end, it took the Emperor himself to break the deadlock. On August 14th, he told his ministers to accept. He would announce the surrender personally over the radio. A break from protocol so profound it amounted to near sacrilege. The Japanese people had never before heard their emperor's voice. Both sides of what was about to happen understood the stakes of that fact completely. Once the emperor's voice went across the airwaves, there was no turning back. No revolt could possibly succeed. Everything that follows is a race to stop that voice, except the race was already over before it began. General Korechika Anami was 58 years old in August 1945 and had spent his entire adult life in service to the Imperial Japanese Army. Broad-faced, straight-backed, a devotee of martial arts since boyhood. By the summer of 1945, He was war minister, the most powerful soldier in Japan, besides the emperor himself. But Anami's relationship to the emperor was not purely institutional. From 1929 to 1930, he had served as Hirohito's personal aide-de-camp. They had spent a year in close proximity. That bond gave Anami a connection to the imperial institution that almost no other officer shared. He did not simply serve the emperor. He knew him. After Hiroshima, Anami declared that he was convinced the Americans had only one bomb after all. He pressed for a final battle on Japanese soil. He sat in the August 9th War Council and refused to yield, but the refusal had limits that were beginning to show themselves. On the night of August 13th, after the emperor had effectively decided, Anami went privately to the chief of the Army General Staff, General Yoshijiro Umezu, and asked him, was there nothing they could do, even at the risk of a coup? Umezu's answer was final. There is nothing we can do now but to comply with the emperor's decision. Anami heard this. He went home. He did not condemn what was being planned. Over the preceding days, a group of officers had come to him. Major Kenji Hatanaka, Colonel Masahiko Takeshita, Anami's own brother-in-law. They laid out their plan and needed Anami's blessing. He listened. He gave no direct answer. His silence they took as encouragement. It was not encouragement, but it was not refusal either. It was a man standing at the edge of two equal destructions, unwilling to name either one. He would sign the surrender document. He would fulfill his duty to the emperor, and then he would answer for everything in the only way his world had left him. He was already preparing to die. The men lobbying him did not know this. They spent days pursuing a man who was, in every way that mattered, already gone. Major Kenji Hatanaka was 33 years old, born in Kyoto, lean and intense, an officer of the military affairs section of the War Ministry. He was not reckless. He was a true believer, and there is a difference. Reckless men know the odds and ignore them. Hatanaka simply could not conceive of a Japan that laid down arms. He had spent weeks in the corridors of the War Ministry gathering allies, refining a plan that had three moving parts. Seize the Imperial Palace, find the phonograph recording, destroy it, occupy NHK headquarters, and broadcast a message urging national resistance. Dispatch assassins to eliminate Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki and other key surrender advocates. The plan's central mechanism, the engine on which every single piece depended, was fabrication. Hatanaka had no authority. He had no senior generals behind him. He would use their names anyway. He intended to claim that War Minister Anami had authorized the coup. That General Umezu had. That the commanders of the Eastern District Army and the Imperial Guards were part of the plan. None of this was true. The senior generals had, in fact, already moved to preempt exactly this. In the hours before the coup launched, Anami, Umezu, and the other most powerful officers in the Japanese army signed a written accord against any coup attempt. Their signatures were on paper before Hatanaka's guns came out. Hatanaka proceeded anyway. He believed, and this was his defining blind spot, that simply beginning the action would inspire the larger army to rise, that the coup would cascade. That conviction, in his mind, was indistinguishable from evidence. Around 9:30 in the evening of August 14th, the 2nd Imperial Guards Regiment enters the palace compound. It has been dispatched specifically on this night to provide extra protection against the very rebellion Hatanaka has spent weeks planning. Hatanaka recruits them within the hour. He approaches their commander, Colonel Toyojiro Haga, and presents his authorization. General Anami is with us, he says. Umezu, the senior commanders of the Imperial Guards themselves, the Eastern District Army. Haga listens. Haga believes. The regiment stands ready. Every name Hatanaka invoked was invoked without permission. Every piece of authority was invented, but there is one authorization that cannot be fabricated. Not yet. Lieutenant General Takeshi Mori commands the 1st Imperial Guard's division. His physical seal of office is required to make any order to the Guards binding. Without Mori, the forged documents are paper. Sometime after 1 o'clock in the morning of August 15th, Hatanaka goes to Mori's office. He brings Shiizaki, Maeda, and Captain Shigetaro Uehara. Mori is in a meeting with his brother-in-law, Michinori Shiraishi. Hatanaka presents his case. He asks Mori to join them. Mori declines. He left no famous words, no recorded speech, no documented final statement. He looked at the armed men in his office, and he refused. What that refusal would cost him, he must have understood. Hatanaka raises his pistol and shoots him. Uehara kills Shiraishi. 2 men in the span of seconds. These are the only killings of the entire night. Then Hatanaka reaches over and takes the dead man's official stamp. He presses it onto Imperial Guard's Division Strategic Order number 584, a forged document directing the Imperial Guard to protect the Emperor, which means, in practice, to imprison him, to seal his palace from the outside world. The man who was shot for refusing to authorize these orders has now, officially, authorized them. Every piece of authority the coup ever claimed was borrowed, stolen, or fabricated. And here, at the hinge of the night, it is signed in a dead man's name. By just after 2 in the morning, the palace gates are closed. Armed soldiers are inside the walls. The search begins. August in Tokyo is oppressive even at night. The air is heavy and wet. The compound is black. Blackout curtains, electricity cut, nothing moving in the shadows except flashlight beams and the sound of boots on stone. Soldiers fan out through the underground corridors, moving through a labyrinth they have never navigated. The signs on the walls are written in archaic official script. The soldiers cannot read them. They move by instinct and guesswork, opening doors to find supply rooms, storage, the startled faces of household staff. They demand to know where the recordings are. They arrest 18 people over the course of the night. They find Marquis Kido's office, empty. They find the room beneath the Imperial Household Ministry, where, 4 hours ago, a man spoke too softly into a microphone. They find the safe, empty. The 2 phonograph records left the palace, in a lacquer box, in something that may have been a lunch bag or a laundry basket, the accounts diverging on the detail but agreeing on the fact, carried out by NHK technicians, past the sentries who had just sealed the gates on Hatanaka's forged orders, before the search had even begun. The coup sealed in armed men hunting for something that was never there. The soldiers keep looking. They do not know there is nothing to find. Across the city, simultaneously, in the War Minister's official residence in the Ichigaya district, General Kurachika Anami is sitting on the floor of his bedroom with a bottle of sake and 2 tumblers and some cheese. His brother-in-law, Colonel Takeshita, one of the coup's early planners, has found him there. Anami speaks without emotion. He says he has decided on seppuku tonight. Takeshita asks whether it has to be tonight. Anami says yes. Tonight is the 14th anniversary of his father's death, and he simply cannot bear to live through the Emperor's broadcast tomorrow. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the sound of gunfire carries from the direction of the palace grounds. Anami's wound, when it comes, is not sufficient to cause quick death. Takeshita, the man who helped plan the coup that Anami refused to endorse and refused to stop, kneels beside his brother-in-law with a lantern and does what must be done. Above the city, at this same hour, 800 B-29 superfortresses and 200 fighter escorts are dropping 6,000 tons of explosives and incendiaries on 8 Japanese cities, the largest conventional air raid of the entire Pacific War. The coup is happening. The seppuku is happening. The largest bombing in the history of the war is happening. History is enormous and indifferent, and inside it, in the dark beneath a palace, Men with flashlights are still searching corridors for a recording that was carried out past their own sentries hours ago. As first light comes, General Shizuichi Tanaka moves. Tanaka commands the Eastern District Army, the force responsible for the Tokyo-Yokohama region. He is 57 years old, a graduate of Oxford, a man who had opposed Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor from the beginning and said so clearly. When Hatanaka had come to him the previous evening seeking support, Tanaka had refused and ordered him home. Hatanaka had ignored the order. Now Tanaka deploys a full division to encircle the Imperial Palace, sealing the bridges as the city begins to wake. Then he enters the compound personally. He finds the rebels and does not address them gently. He tells them that what they have done is contrary to every principle the Japanese army was built upon, that the dishonor of their treason cannot be talked away. A number of conspirators perform ritual suicide on the palace grounds that morning. The rebellion does not go out fighting. It goes out on its knees. Hatanaka and Shiizaki are not arrested. Everyone present understands why. They are permitted to leave. Hatanaka rides a motorcycle out through the palace gates. Shiizaki goes on horseback. They move through the ruined streets of Tokyo, scattering leaflets that explain what they did and why. The city does not respond. Nobody rises. The streets are quiet except for the cicadas and the distant sound of burning. By 11 o'clock, Hatanaka stops his motorcycle. He places his pistol to his forehead. Shiizaki follows minutes later, a dagger first, then a gun. Both men are dead before noon. Neither of them will hear the broadcast they spent the night trying to prevent. Radio announcers across Japan have spent the morning telling the nation to listen at noon. Listen honestly. Listen solemnly. Do not fail to listen. At 11:59, air raid sirens sound briefly across Tokyo and fall silent. On streets across the country, people stop walking. Workers step out of factories. Families cluster around radios. In many places, the summer cicadas are very loud and people tilt their heads to hear over them. At NHK headquarters, a technician places the needle on the phonograph record. He stands. He bows his head. A voice comes through the static. Faint, reedy, tremulous. It moves through classical Japanese. Formal, archaic, words that most listeners can barely parse. But certain phrases cut through. A new and most cruel bomb. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. It calls on the nation to endure the unendurable and suffer what is insufferable. It never uses the word surrender. It does not have to. When the voice falls silent, a radio announcer comes on to explain, in plain modern Japanese, what the emperor's message actually meant. Japan is surrendering. The war is over. The streets go empty. The cicadas fill the silence. The recordings that armed men spent a night in the dark, trying to find and destroy, have done what they were pressed to do. The formal surrender was signed on September 2, 1945, on the deck of the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. But this story ends before that morning. It ends in the things left behind. In Hatanaka's pocket, when they found him on a Tokyo street, there was a slip of paper, a death poem written before he raised the pistol. It read, "I have nothing to regret now that the dark clouds have disappeared from the reign of the Emperor." The man who spent the night of August 14th trying to prevent the Emperor's broadcast died at peace with the Emperor's decision. He died before that decision was broadcast. He never heard the words, and yet the poem suggests he had found some way to accept them, or to tell himself he had. The circle closes, and it makes no sense, and it makes complete sense. He is 33 years old, lying on an empty street in a burning city, and whatever he believed at the end was not what he fought for the night before. In the Yushukan Museum in Tokyo, beside Yasukuni Shrine, there is a glass case. Inside it, a sword, a blood-splattered dress uniform, and a piece of paper covered in Anami's handwriting. The note reads, "With my death, I humbly apologize for the great crime." One great crime. No further specification. Was he apologizing for losing the war? For the proximity his silence gave to a coup against an emperor he had served his entire life? For something else entirely, some private accounting only he could balance? No one has ever settled the question. The note survives. Its meaning does not. It sits behind glass in a museum next to a shrine to the war dead, and it keeps its silence the way Anami kept his silence throughout the night it concerns. And then there is General Shizuichi Tanaka. He had opposed Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, and said so at the time. He had studied at Oxford. On the previous evening he had refused Hatanaka's approach and ordered him home. At dawn he had deployed his full division, sealed the bridges, walked into the seized palace personally, and confronted the rebels. He had crushed the last militarist revolt in Japanese history. On August 24, 1945, 9 days after the broadcast, General Shizuichi Tanaka sat at his desk at Eastern District Army Headquarters in Tokyo and fired a pistol into his own heart. The code that drove Hatanaka to murder a general and forge his seal and spend a night in the dark searching for a voice he could not silence, the code that told these men their deaths were answers when their lives had become unbearable, did not distinguish between the conspirator and the man who stopped him. It did not weigh whose cause was righteous. It consumed Hatanaka, and it consumed the man who crushed him, and it consumed Anami, who stood between them refusing to choose, and it asked only whether you could continue, and when you could not, it had one answer. Nobody got out clean. The palace is still there, the bunker is still there, the microphones are gone, and somewhere in an archive, 2 pieces of vinyl hold 4 minutes and 45 seconds of a voice so soft the technicians worried it wouldn't record, carried out of a sealed building in the dark by men whose names history mostly didn't keep, past sentries who had just locked the gates against the very mission those men were completing. They set their levels, exchanged a worried look, and walked the voice outside. The dawn came. The needle dropped. The cicadas sang in the silence after, and across a nation that had been told for a decade it could never be conquered, people sat very still with the radio's hiss in their ears, waiting to understand what came next.